I want you to understand something before I tell you any of this. I was proud of my rank, proud of my uniform, proud of the Valkyrie ascendancy and the 700 years of diplomatic supremacy that had given my species the right to sit at the center table of the conquered summit chamber. Proud of the fact that when I walked into a room on conquered Station Oralis, lesser species stepped aside. Not because I demanded it, because the geometry of galactic power demanded it for me. I had earned my position through 4 decades of service. Cultural attaché on 9 frontier worlds, senior liaison during the Bravari trade realignment, deputy consul during the annexation of the Mekran corridor, a campaign I still described in those days as stabilization. My superiors trusted me because I produced results without spectacle. I was the man they sent when something needed to happen quietly. I tell you this not for sympathy. I tell you this so you understand the kind of person who watched what happened next and did nothing. My name is Torath Ven. I was 46 standard years old when the humans came to Oralis for their formal introduction to the Galactic Concord. And I was 46 standard years old when I watched the Ascendancy murder their ambassador on a lit stage in front of 1,100 delegates and convinced myself it was necessary. The summit chamber on Oralis is the largest enclosed diplomatic space in the Orion Spur, a vast ovoid carved from a captured asteroid, with tiered seating descending toward a central dais where each species presented its credentials. The acoustics were designed so that a whisper at the center podium reached the highest tier with perfect clarity. Every species that had entered the Concord in the last 3 centuries had stood on that dais and offered their introduction. The humans were the 29th species to do so, the youngest, the smallest delegation, the least prepared by every metric we use to measure such things. Their ambassador was a man named David Okafor. I want to be careful here because I have spent 11 years reconstructing what I saw through the filter of what I now know, and the two are not the same. What I saw that day was a tall, dark-skinned human male in a plain gray suit, no ceremonial armor, no species crest, no rank insignia beyond a small pin on his lapel that I later learned was the flag of a nation-state called Nigeria. He moved slowly. He smiled too easily. When he spoke, his voice carried a warmth that I interpreted at the time as naivety. He was 53 years old. He had been a school teacher before the contact, then a provincial administrator. Then, because the humans had no diplomatic corps for galactic affairs and had to build one from nothing in 11 months, their ambassador, a school teacher. The Bravari delegate, Senuk Tai, leaned toward me during Okafor's opening remarks and said, "They sent us a classroom instructor." I remember laughing. I want you to hold that laugh in your mind. I want you to hear it the way I hear it now, 11 years later, at 3 in the morning when the room is dark and the sound is the only thing in it. Okafor's address was 14 minutes long. I have obtained the full transcript since, and I've read it more times than I can count. At the time, I barely listened. The substance was unremarkable by Concord standards: gratitude for the invitation, acknowledgement of humanity's junior status, a request for trade consultation and cultural exchange frameworks. Standard fare. What I remember is the cadence. Okafor spoke the way someone speaks to a room full of students he respects. Not deferential, not aggressive, engaged, as if he found each delegate genuinely interesting and was speaking to them individually. The Mekran delegation shifted uncomfortably. The Sorvani ambassador's gill flaps tightened, which I knew from experience indicated confusion. The Davari consul simply stared. None of us had ever been addressed by a junior species that way. Not with hostility, with warmth. I flagged it in my private notes as cultural miscalibration likely correctable through standard orientation protocols. The formal summit was scheduled for 9 days. Trade agreements, resource allocation, transit corridor licensing. The humans had been granted provisional observer status 6 months prior, and their full membership application was on the docket for day 7. But the real business, as always, happened in the corridors. I was present when High Consul Dekath Ren summoned Okafor to a private session on the evening of day 2. Ren was the Ascendancy's senior diplomatic authority at the summit, a man I had served under for 9 years and admired without reservation. He was precise, strategic, and I believed then principled. He had overseen the Mekran integration with minimal casualties. He had negotiated the Bravari trade compact that stabilized fuel prices across 4 sectors. He was not a warlord. He was a statesman. He was also, I would later learn, the architect of something called Contingency Veil 9, a classified protocol I did not have clearance to read, but I am getting ahead of myself. The private session took place in a secondary conference room on Auralis's diplomatic tier. I attended as Ren's aide. Okafor arrived alone, which I noted as either brave or foolish. Ren was cordial. He poured Okafor a glass of a mild Valkyrie stimulant beverage and spent 20 minutes asking about Earth, its geography, its political structure, its educational system. Okafor answered everything openly with the same classroom warmth. He described monsoon seasons on the Indian subcontinent. He talked about his son, who was 14 and wanted to study marine biology. He explained with evident pride how humanity had built its first interstellar vessel from a converted asteroid mining platform in 9 years. Ren listened to all of it. Then he set down his glass and said, "Ambassador Okafor, I want to discuss your colony on Rethani 4. The warmth did not leave Okafor's face, but something behind his eyes changed. A door closing. Not hostility. Attention. "Of course," Okafor said. "What would you like to know?" "The Rethani corridor falls within the Ascendancy's extended administrative sphere," Ren said. "Your settlement there was established without consultation." "The corridor was designated unclaimed in the Concord's most recent territorial survey," Okafor replied. "We verified this before the first transport launched. Designations can be revised." The room was quiet for a moment. I watched Okafor study Ren's face with an expression I could not read. Then the human smiled, not the warm smile from the summit floor, but something smaller, more private, directed entirely inward, and said, "High Consul, are you telling me your government intends to claim the Rethani corridor retroactively?" "I am telling you," Ren said, "that the Ascendancy's interests in that region are older than your species' awareness that the region existed, and that a colony of 11,000 humans on a world they have occupied for 19 months does not constitute a competing claim." Okafor nodded slowly. "I understand. And if a formal objection is filed through the Concord's Territorial Commission, there will be no formal objection." Another silence, longer. "I see," Okafor said. I did not understand what I was hearing. I wrote in my notes, Ren establishing negotiating position, standard territorial pressure. Okafor responding within expected parameters. I was wrong about all of it. Day 5 of the summit. The session on junior species integration. I remember the light in the chamber. Auralis's environmental systems simulated a neutral spectrum illumination designed to be comfortable for the broadest range of visual systems. But on that particular morning, a minor calibration fault had shifted the ambient temperature 2 degrees cooler and the light slightly bluer than standard. Several delegates commented on it. The Devari consul joked that the station was mourning something in advance. I think about that joke more than I should. Okafor was scheduled to present humanity's membership application at the afternoon session. He had spent the previous 2 days in quiet consultation with delegations from the Bravari, the Sorvani, and the Tessari League, the 3 polities most likely to support a junior species application against ascendancy objection. I knew this because I was tracking his movements, not formally, not under orders. I tracked him because Ren had asked me casually over breakfast on day 3 to keep an eye on our new friend's social calendar. I did not question why. That morning, Okafor attended the integration session as an observer. He sat in the 3rd tier, slightly apart from the main human delegation, 4 junior diplomats and a cultural attaché. All of them younger, all of them visibly nervous in a way Okafor was not. During a break in proceedings, I watched him cross the chamber to speak with the Tessari trade delegate, a being named Korath 7, who I knew from prior summits to be sympathetic to frontier species. They spoke for 6 minutes. I could not hear the conversation from my position, but I watched Okafor's hands. Humans gesture when they speak. I had read this in the cultural briefing, and Okafor's gestures were measured, open-palmed, rhythmic. At one point he placed his hand briefly on 7's forelimb, and the Tessari did not withdraw. A touch, between species. On the summit floor. I noted it as a breach of protocol that should be flagged but was unlikely to cause incident. Korath 7 was found dead in his quarters 4 hours later. Cardiac event. Natural causes according to the station's medical authority, which was administered by the Ascendancy. I did not connect the 2 events. I need you to understand that. I am not telling you I suspected and said nothing. I am telling you that the most experienced diplomatic operative in the Valkyrie Corps looked at a convenient death and saw a coincidence, because the alternative was unthinkable, because Ren did not do things like that, because the Ascendancy was a civilizational institution, not a criminal enterprise. Because I was proud. The afternoon session. Okafor stood at the central dais and presented humanity's membership application. He spoke for 22 minutes. I have the transcript. I will not reproduce it here in full, but I will tell you the part that mattered. Near the end, he departed from his prepared remarks. He looked up from his notes directly into the tiered seating, and he said, I know that we are young. I know that our presence here is provisional, and that many of you have reservations about a species that has been in space for less than a generation. Those reservations are reasonable. I share some of them myself. A small ripple of sound moved through the chamber. Diplomatic laughter. Okafor waited for it to pass. But I want to say something about Rethani 4, not about territorial claims or transit rights. Those are matters for the Commission, and we will abide by whatever process the Concord applies. I want to say something about the 11,000 people who live there. He paused, adjusted his glasses, a corrective lens apparatus that I found at the time charmingly primitive. 7 months ago, a soil specialist named Thomas Herrera figured out how to modify Rethani grain to grow in the alkaline flats near the northern settlement. The colony had been importing food at considerable expense, and Herrera's work changed that. Last month, the first children born on Rethani 4 started school. There are 41 of them. Their teacher is a man named James Achebe, no relation to the author, he always says, though I suspect he enjoys the question. The chamber was very quiet. I mention this because those are the people whose status we are discussing. Not abstractions, not territorial markers. 41 children in a school. A man who found a way to grow grain in soil that said no. That is what humanity's membership application is, not a document. A school. He stopped. He looked at Ren's delegation at me, though I am certain he was not seeing me specifically, and he said, "Thank you for hearing us." He stepped back from the dais. I remember the silence that followed. 4 seconds, maybe 5. Then the applause began scattered at first, led by the Sorvani delegation, then spreading. Not thunderous, polite, but real. Ren did not applaud. He sat motionless in his chair, his expression composed, his long fingers laced in front of him. I had seen that expression before. It was the face he wore when a negotiation had confirmed his assessment and he was preparing to act on it. I leaned toward him. "Well received," I said. "Better than expected." Ren turned to me. His eyes were calm. "Torath," he said, "please ensure the ambassador's delegation is escorted to the reception hall for the evening function, personally." "Of course." "And Torath." "Yes, Consul? Make sure he's in the center of the room." The reception hall on Auralis's upper tier was designed for exactly these events, post-session social functions, where the real architecture of power was built over drinks and proximity. The room was circular, tiered with conversation alcoves along the perimeter, and open at the center around a low table displaying cultural artifacts from each attending species. The humans had contributed a small bronze sculpture of 2 hands clasped together. I remember thinking it was earnest to the point of embarrassment. Okafor arrived at the reception in the same gray suit. His junior diplomats flanked him, clearly briefed to circulate but gravitating back to their ambassador every few minutes, like satellites unable to escape orbit. I positioned myself near the Sorvani alcove, close enough to observe without appearing to monitor. The room filled, 11 species, perhaps 300 delegates total. The ambient sound rose the clicking of Mekran consonants, the low harmonic thrum of Davari conversational registers, the sharp, precise syllables of Bravari trade speak. Okafor moved through it with the same open warmth I had catalogued on day 1, stopping to speak with each delegation, accepting beverages he barely sipped, laughing at jokes I suspect he only partially understood. At the 40-minute mark, the lights in the reception hall dimmed by 15%. I assumed it was another environmental calibration fault. It was not. High Consul Ren entered from the primary access corridor, flanked not by diplomatic aides, but by 4 members of the Ascendancy's Sovereign Guard. a security detail I had never seen deployed on a diplomatic station. They wore ceremonial armor, which meant the armor was functional. They carried sidearms in visible holsters, which on Auralis, under Concord neutrality protocols, was a violation severe enough to trigger an automatic session suspension. No one moved to suspend anything. Ren walked to the center of the room. The delegates parted. Not dramatically, there was no gasping, no sudden silence of the kind storytellers invent. People simply shifted, conversations abbreviated, glasses were set down. The geometry of the room reorganized itself around Ren the way space-time reorganizes around mass. He stopped in front of David Okafor. "Ambassador," Ren said. His voice was conversational, friendly even. "I enjoyed your remarks this afternoon." "Thank you, High Consul." Okafor's tone was steady. His hands were at his sides. "It was a privilege to address the chamber." "The school," Ren said. 41 children. A lovely image. He paused. "I want to ask you something, if I may, directly." "Of course." "Did you believe that your appeal to sentiment would change the outcome?" The room contracted. I felt it a thermodynamic event, as if the air molecules themselves had drawn closer together. Okafor's expression did not change, but the quality of his stillness shifted. He was no longer a man at a party. He was a man doing arithmetic. "I believe," Okafor said carefully, "that the Concord's processes are designed to produce fair outcomes." Ren smiled. It was a real smile. That was the worst part. "Torath," Ren said, without turning. "Read the motion." My hands were already holding the tablet. I did not remember picking it up. I did not remember Ren giving it to me. But it was there, and on its screen was a document bearing the seal of the Valkyrie Ascendancy's Sovereign Council, and my voice was speaking the words before my mind had fully processed them. "By emergency resolution of the Sovereign Council, acting under Article 12 of the Concord Security Framework, the Valkyrie Ascendancy hereby designates the human colony on Rethany 4 as an illegal territorial incursion into sovereign space. All human nationals on Rethany 4 are to be detained pending deportation. The colony's infrastructure is to be dismantled. Human membership application to the Galactic Concord is suspended indefinitely pending resolution of the territorial dispute." I read every word. My voice did not shake. Okafor listened with his hands still at his sides. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "High Consul, 11,000 people live on Rethany 4. 41 children attend school there. You are describing forced displacement of—" "I am describing the enforcement of sovereign law," Ren said, "which the Concord's own charter empowers. The Concord's charter requires a vote of the full assembly before—" "The vote was held this morning, during the integration session you attended." Ren's voice was patient, almost kind. "Emergency protocol, closed ballot, 7-4. The Tessari unfortunately abstained. Their trade delegate was indisposed." The room was very still. Okafor's jaw tightened. One small muscle, that was all. "Korath 7, he said. "The Tessari delegate who spoke with me this morning, who is now dead." "A tragedy," Ren said. "Unrelated." "I would like to contact my government." "Communications from Auralis are currently restricted under emergency security protocols." "I would like to contact my delegation." "Your delegation has been escorted to secure quarters for their safety. Auralis is a complex station, Ambassador. We would not want anyone to become lost." Okafor stood very still. I watched his hands. They did not tremble. His breathing did not change. His eyes moved once across the room, across the delegates, across me, across the Sovereign Guard and their visible weapons, and then returned to Ren. "High Consul," he said, "what is this?" Ren stepped closer. Close enough that what he said next was audible only to those of us within 3 meters. I was one of them. "This," Ren said, "is the galaxy correcting an error. Your species was admitted to the provisional process because the Concord mistook novelty for value. That mistake is being rectified. Your colony will be absorbed, your delegation will be sent home, and your species will learn what every other junior species has learned in the 700 years since the Ascendancy took its seat. That warmth is not a strategy, and a school teacher is not a diplomat." David Okafor looked at Dakath Ren for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, You're going to regret this. Not a threat, not rage, a diagnosis, delivered the way a doctor delivers a prognosis, not with anger at the disease, but with sorrow for the patient. Ren's expression flickered. Just once, a fracture so brief I might have imagined it. Then Ren nodded to the Sovereign Guard. What happened next took 11 seconds. I know because the station's security logs recorded it with timestamp precision, and I have watched those logs more times than I have slept since. The guard seized Okafor's arms. He did not resist. One guard produced a neural restraint, a device prohibited under 16 separate Concord conventions, and placed it at the base of Okafor's skull. Okafor's body went rigid. His eyes stayed open. Ren leaned close to him and said, "Your colony is already being occupied. Your people are already in custody. This performance was a courtesy." Then they dragged David Okafor from the reception hall, past 300 silent delegates, past the bronze sculpture of clasped hands, past me. His eyes found mine as he passed. Not accusation, not plea, recognition. He saw me. He saw what I was. And in the 2 seconds our eyes met, I understood that he had known since the first day. Known what Ren was planning. Known what I was. Known what the summit was for. He had come anyway. They executed him in a maintenance corridor 14 minutes later. Cardiac disruption via the neural restraint, calibrated to appear natural. The official report listed the cause of death as stress-induced cardiac failure, complicated by incompatible atmospheric pressure. The humans, it was implied, were simply too fragile for the station environment. A regrettable outcome. I signed the incident report. My hand was steady. The first hour after Okafor's death was administrative. I want you to understand that because it is the detail that wakes me up at night more than any other. Not the execution itself, not Ren's words, the paperwork, the systematic, competent, procedurally correct processing of a murdered diplomat's personal effects. His tablet was logged and sealed. His clothing was catalogued. The small pin, the Nigerian flag, was placed in an evidence bag and filed under miscellaneous personal items, non-strategic. His son's name was Emeka. I learned this later. He was 14. He wanted to study marine biology. I filed the pin. The human delegation was confined to their quarters under guard. Communications from Oralis remained restricted. Ren convened a private session with the Ascendancy's military liaison within the hour, confirming that the occupation force dispatched to Rithani 4 had arrived on schedule and that the colony's civilian population was being processed for relocation. I attended this session. I took notes. I asked clarifying questions about logistics. At no point during the first 6 hours did I experience what I would now recognize as moral crisis. I experienced administrative discomfort, a low-grade awareness that the execution had been more public than necessary, that the optics were suboptimal, that the Servani delegation's formal protest, filed within 30 minutes, would require careful management. But these were professional concerns, operational concerns, the concerns of a man whose job was to make difficult outcomes appear inevitable. The galaxy was quiet. This was expected. The Concord's membership had watched the Ascendancy absorb territories before. The Mekran Corridor, the Tessari frontier disputes. The pattern was established. The Ascendancy acted. The Concord protested formally. The protests were noted, and the galaxy moved on. The humans were the 29th species to join the Concord. They would be the first to be expelled. It was a correction, a footnote. The human delegation's communications equipment had been confiscated. Their ship, a mid-range transport called the Orinoco, docked at Oralis's commercial tier, had been placed under quarantine seal. Every channel by which the humans might have contacted Earth was closed, every channel we knew about. I was in my quarters reviewing the next day's briefing documents when my aide, Korath Ven, my nephew, 3 years into his first diplomatic posting, eager and unquestioning in the way I had been eager and unquestioning 30 years prior, knocked on my door. "Uncle, something is happening on the communications array." "What kind of something?" The monitoring station flagged an anomaly. A transmission burst from the commercial docking tier. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but the signal density was... The technicians said they hadn't seen encoding like it before. "Source?" "The human transport, the Orinoco." I set down my tablet. "The Orinoco is under quarantine seal. Its communication systems were physically disabled." "Yes, sir." "Then how?" The technicians believe the humans used their engine's navigational transponder. They repurposed a system designed to broadcast automated positioning data into a high-density communications array. He paused. The signal was aimed at Sol system, at Earth. I sat very still. How much data could a navigational transponder transmit in 2 seconds? At standard density, almost nothing, a few kilobytes. But the encoding the humans used, Korath hesitated. The technicians estimated the effective payload at 11 terabytes. I did not know, at that time, what 11 terabytes meant in human information architecture. I learned later that it was enough to contain the full audiovisual recording of the reception hall, every angle, every word, every timestamp, plus the station's atmospheric data, the security deployment logs that the humans should not have been able to access, Okafor's biometric telemetry from the neural restraint, the medical examiner's preliminary notes, and the text of every internal ascendancy communication sent through the station's network in the preceding 72 hours. The humans had been inside our systems from the moment they arrived. They had watched us prepare to kill their ambassador. They had let it happen. And then they had told Earth everything. The next 6 hours were the longest of my life, not because of what happened during them, because of what did not happen. Nothing. Earth received the transmission. We confirmed this. Our Signals Intelligence Directorate tracked the burst to its destination and verified receipt by a ground station in a region the humans called Western Australia. The signal arrived. It was processed. It was presumably read, decoded, understood. And then nothing. No response. No diplomatic communique. No demand for explanation. No threat. No protest filed through the Concord's emergency channels. No distress signal to allied species. No activation of the humans' modest military assets, which our intelligence assessments had catalogued as 7 patrol corvettes and 2 refitted mining vessels with light armament. Nothing. Wren summoned me at the 4-hour mark. He was in his private study on the diplomatic tier, standing at the viewport with a glass of something he wasn't drinking. "What are they doing?" he asked. "Nothing, Consul. Nothing is not an answer. Nothing is a gap in our intelligence. What are they doing?" "Our signals monitoring has detected no outgoing transmissions from Sol system, no fleet movements, no increase in communications traffic. Earth's orbital infrastructure appears to be operating at baseline activity levels." Wren turned from the viewport. "They received confirmation that their ambassador was murdered, their colony occupied, and their delegation imprisoned. And they are doing nothing? It is possible they are in shock. The humans have no experience with shock lasts minutes, Torath. Not hours. Institutional paralysis lasts hours. Strategic calculation lasts hours." He set down his glass. "What are they calculating?" I did not have an answer. At the 5-hour mark, the Sorvani ambassador, a being named Herath Duun, whom I respected professionally, requested a private audience with Wren. Wren declined. Duun sent a written message instead, which I read and summarized. "The Sorvani Collective formally requests clarification regarding the status of the human delegation. The Collective notes that the silence from Sol system is inconsistent with any behavioral model in our database for a species that has just lost a diplomatic representative. The Collective recommends extreme caution." Wren read the summary and said, "The Sorvani are projecting their own anxiety onto a species that doesn't have the capacity to do what they're afraid of. Consul, with respect, the transmission from the Orinoco suggests a level of technical capability we did not account for." A clever trick with a transponder. It changes nothing about the strategic balance. The 11 terabytes means they are thorough observers, not that they are dangerous. A recording device is not a weapon, Torath. I nodded. I filed my concern. I returned to my quarters. At the 6-hour mark, every communication system on Oralis activated simultaneously. I was in the corridor outside my quarters when it happened. Every screen, every speaker, every personal device, every environmental display panel on the station. A structure housing 4,000 permanent residents and 1,100 diplomatic delegates lit up with the same signal. A human face. Not Okafor, a man I had never seen. Old by human standards, perhaps 70. Dark-skinned, deep lines around his mouth and eyes. He wore a plain dark jacket with no insignia. His hair was white and close-cropped. He sat behind a desk that held nothing on it except a single framed photograph that faced away from the camera. He looked tired, not performatively, genuinely, as if he had been awake for a long time, doing something that cost him, and had sat down to say this one thing before the cost caught up to him. He spoke an unaccented Concord standard, a language the humans had been studying for less than 2 years. My name is Solomon Adeyemi. I am the elected representative of Earth's unified government. I am speaking to every member of the Galactic Concord simultaneously. This message is being broadcast on all frequencies, in all diplomatic languages, and cannot be intercepted, jammed, or redacted. He paused. Not for effect. To breathe. 6 hours and 14 minutes ago, our ambassador, David Okafor, was murdered by agents of the Valkyrie Ascendancy on Concord Station Oralis during a diplomatic function attended by delegates of 11 species. The murder was premeditated, executed using a prohibited neural restraint device, and disguised as a medical event. We possess the complete evidentiary record, which is being transmitted to every Concord member government as I speak. Another pause. Concurrent with Ambassador Okafor's murder, a Valkyrie military force occupied our colony on Rathani 4. 11,312 civilians, including 41 children, are currently held under armed detention. Their status is unknown. Communications with the colony have been severed. Solomon Adeyemi looked directly into the camera. I was standing in a corridor on an asteroid station 400 light-years from Earth, and I felt him looking at me. The Valkyrie Ascendancy has committed an act of war against humanity. We did not seek this, we do not welcome it, and we will not perform outrage for your consumption. You have the evidence, you know what was done. He reached forward and turned the photograph on his desk toward the camera. 2 men standing together in a garden. One was Okafor. The other was Adeyemi himself, 20 years younger, with his arm around Okafor's shoulder. Both smiling. David was my friend for 31 years, Adeyemi said. He volunteered for this posting because he believed that the galaxy was worth talking to. I am not here to tell you he was wrong. I am here to tell you what happens next. He set the photograph down. To the Valkyrie Ascendancy, you have 6 hours to release every human national on Rathani 4 unharmed. You have 6 hours to return the body of Ambassador Okafor to his delegation. You have 6 hours to withdraw your military assets from the Rathani corridor. He folded his hands. To the Galactic Concord, you watched. 11 species with the collective power to stop what happened, and you watched. We do not ask you to act now. We do not need you to act now. To everyone else, what comes after the 6 hours is not a negotiation. The transmission ended. The screens on Oralis returned to their default displays. The environmental lighting resumed its standard spectrum. The corridor I stood in was exactly as it had been 10 minutes before. The same walls, the same air, the same recycled atmosphere with its faint mineral taste. Everything was different. I found Ren in the command center. He was already in communication with the Ascendancy's military directorate. I entered without requesting permission, which I had never done in 9 years of service, and he did not reprimand me for it, which told me more about his state of mind than anything he said afterward. The transmission penetrated every secured channel on the station, he said without looking up. It penetrated the Ascendancy's military encryption. It penetrated the Concord's diplomatic cipher. It reached every government in the Orion Spur simultaneously. How? We don't know. The humans' communication technology was assessed as... I know what it was assessed as, Torath. He looked up. For the first time in 9 years, I saw something in his eyes that I could not classify using the vocabulary of Valkyrie emotional taxonomy. Later, much later, I would learn the human word for it. Dread. The fleet at Rathani 4 reports no changes in the human colony's behavior, he said. The civilians are cooperating with processing. No resistance, no attempt at escape or sabotage. They know help is coming. Help! Ren repeated the word as if testing its structural integrity. They have 7 patrol corvettes, Torath. We have 900 warships in the Rathani sector alone. Consul, the transmission was a bluff, a sophisticated one, but a bluff. They cannot project force at a scale that threatens us. The intelligence is clear. The intelligence said their communications technology was 2 generations behind ours. Ren was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Inform the fleet to accelerate the relocation timeline. I want the colony dismantled and the humans off-world within 4 hours. Before the deadline. Before whatever they have planned requires a stage to perform on. I transmitted the order. The deadline passed. No one slept. Across Oralis, delegates from 11 species occupied their respective communication suites, monitoring every sensor feed available, watching the Rathani corridor, watching Sol system, watching the empty space between. The Sorvani had moved their diplomatic yacht to ready departure status. The Bravari delegation had requested and been denied emergency transit clearance. At 6 hours and 1 minute, the first reports came from the Ascendancy's deep space monitoring network. Long-range sensors in the outer Rathani corridor detected a gravitational anomaly, then another, then 40 more. Then the sensors stopped reporting. Not destroyed, not jammed. The sensors simply ceased transmitting data, as if they had decided, independently and simultaneously, that there was nothing to report. Our technicians later determined that the sensors had been overwritten at the firmware level, their operating systems replaced with a single line of code that translated roughly as, "You are not looking at this." The Ascendancy's military directorate lost contact with the Rathani sector fleet 7 minutes later. 900 warships, 42 support vessels, 2 orbital defense platforms, gone from our networks as if they had never existed, not destroyed. We knew that almost immediately because the Concord's neutral observation satellites, which the humans had apparently left untouched, continued to report. They showed us what was happening in the Rathani corridor in real time. I will describe what the satellites showed, and I want you to understand that I am describing it as I saw it then, not as I understand it now, because the understanding came later, in pieces, over years. What I saw that night was raw, and I did not have the framework to process it. The human fleet arrived from 17 vectors simultaneously, not sequentially. Simultaneously. As if they had been positioned around the Rathani corridor in advance and had waited not for the deadline to pass, but for some internal signal I could not detect. The lead elements were not warships, they were cargo transports. Massive, ugly utilitarian vessels with no visible weapon systems and hull markings that identified them as belonging to something called the Terran Emergency Logistics Corps. They numbered in the hundreds, and they dropped into the Rathani corridor like stones into water, displacing the Ascendancy's perimeter pickets through sheer navigational precision, threading gaps in our formation that our own tactical computers had not identified as gaps. Behind the transports came the escorts. Patrol corvettes, yes, but not 7. Hundreds, each one different, each one modified. I saw hull configurations that bore the marks of hasty, brilliant improvisation mining vessels with military-grade sensor arrays welded to their spines, cargo shuttles with point defense grids bolted to their frames, research platforms bristling with equipment I could not identify. Behind the escorts came the warships. I need to say something about this, and I need to say it carefully, because the word warship meant something specific to me before that night, and it has meant something different ever since. The Valkyrie Ascendancy built warships the way we built everything, with elegance, with precision, with an eye toward aesthetic coherence that reflected our civilizational values. Our vessels were beautiful. They were designed to project authority through form. A Valkyrie dreadnought was a statement before it was a weapon. The human warships were not statements. They were not elegant. They were not beautiful. They were thick. Layer upon layer of armor, redundant systems stacked on redundant systems, hull plating that bore the scars of impacts that should have been fatal and had been repaired rather than replaced. They looked like they had been built by people who expected to be hurt and had designed every surface to survive it. No smooth lines, no aesthetic concessions. Every angle was functional. Every protrusion was a weapon or a sensor or a shield generator or a backup for something that had already failed and been rebuilt. They were the ugliest vessels I had ever seen. They were the most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed. They numbered over 3,000. The Ascendancy's Rathani fleet did not engage. I want to be clear about this, because the official record was later revised to describe a tactical withdrawal, and I will not allow that fiction to stand in anything I put my name to. They did not withdraw. They froze. 900 warships, crewed by the most professional military force in the Orion Spur, looked at what had just arrived and did nothing, not because they were ordered to stand down. Communications with the fleet had been severed. They did nothing because every commander in that fleet independently performed the same calculation and arrived at the same answer. The answer was no. The human fleet did not fire. It did not hail the Ascendancy's ships. It did not demand surrender. It simply moved through the Ascendancy's formation like water through a net, heading for Rethani 4, and if a Valkyrie warship was in the path, the human vessels adjusted course by the minimum necessary margin and continued. One Ascendancy destroyer, the Valith's Grace, commanded by a man named Torek Sen, who I had met at a fleet reception 2 years prior, rotated to present its broadside to a passing human dreadnought. A threat display, the kind of gesture that, in Valkyrie military doctrine, required a response. The human dreadnought did not respond. It passed the Valith's Grace at a distance of 400 meters, close enough that Torek Sen could have seen the welds on its hull through his viewport, and it did not deviate, did not slow, did not acknowledge the Valith's Grace's existence. Torek Sen rotated his ship back to its original heading and did not move again. The first human vessels reached Rethani 4 41 minutes after entering the corridor. The cargo transports, the ones that had arrived first, the ones with no weapons, descended to the colony's landing zone while the warships took up orbital positions. The Ascendancy's ground force 3,000 troops who had spent 4 days processing 11,000 human civilians for relocation, watched the sky fill with descending transports and did what anyone does when the parameters of a situation exceed every model they have been trained on. They called for orders. No orders came. Communications were dead. The first human to step off a transport was not a soldier. The observation satellites had sufficient resolution to identify him later. His name was Marcus Rivera. He was a paramedic from the colony's medical staff who had been held in the detention processing center. He had somehow talked his way past the Ascendancy guards or walked past them, unnoticed, while they stared at the sky and met the transport on the landing pad. He was carrying a child, a boy, perhaps 2 years old, wrapped in a thermal blanket. The child was asleep. Rivera walked up the transport's ramp, handed the child to someone inside, turned around, and walked back to the detention center to get the next one. I am compressing time. The reality of the next 30 hours was operational, logistical, and brutally mundane. The human fleet secured the Rethani corridor. The Ascendancy's forces were not disarmed, they were ignored. Their weapons still functioned. Their ships still flew. They were simply rendered irrelevant by the density and positioning of the human fleet, the way a river renders a stone irrelevant. You can be as hard as you want. The water still goes where it's going. On Auralis we watched. Every delegate, every aide, every maintenance technician and food service worker and docking authority clerk. The Concorde's neutral observation feeds were broadcast on every screen, and nobody turned them off. Ren was in continuous communication with the Sovereign Council on the Valkyrie homeworld. I was not present for those conversations. I was present for the aftermath, the way his face changed each time he emerged from his private comm suite. Layer by layer, the composure dissolved, not into panic, into something I recognized from my years of diplomatic service but had never seen on Ren's face, the realization that he was no longer the most competent person in the room. On the morning of the second day, the human delegation's senior surviving member, a junior diplomat named Elias Acheson, 28 years old, who had been confined to quarters since Okafor's death, was released by Auralis Station security without explanation. No one had given the order. The security staff simply opened the door and stepped aside. Later investigations suggested that their access systems had been administratively reclassified to treat the human quarters as unrestricted space. By whom, we never determined. Acheson walked to the diplomatic tier and requested a meeting with the full Concorde Assembly. He was granted one. Not because anyone wanted to hear what he had to say, because no one could think of a reason to say no that wouldn't be broadcast on the same channels the humans had already demonstrated they controlled. Acheson stood at the central dais where Okafor had stood 3 days earlier. He was pale. His hands were visible and empty. He spoke for 4 minutes. "I am not an ambassador," he said. "I am a junior attaché who was assigned to this posting because I scored well on a language aptitude test. I do not have the authority to negotiate on behalf of my government, and I will not pretend otherwise." He placed a small device on the podium, a portable holo projector. I have been asked to deliver a message, not from our government, from the colony. The projector activated. It showed a room, a prefabricated shelter of the kind used in frontier colonies, with metal walls and a bare floor. In the room sat 11 men around a makeshift table. Colonists, workers. Their clothes were dusty. Several had visible injuries, bandaged arms, bruised faces. One man, elderly, had his left arm in a sling. "My name is Thomas Herrera," said the man at the head of the table, the soil specialist, the one who had figured out how to grow grain in alkaline soil. "I'm speaking on behalf of the Settlement Council of Rethani 4. He looked into the camera with the same directness that Okafor had looked into the camera. I was beginning to understand that this was not a trained diplomatic behavior. It was simply how humans looked at things they considered important. We want to say something to the Galactic Conquered, and we want to say it clearly, so there's no misunderstanding. He glanced at the men beside him. One of them, young, barely adult, with a fresh scar across his forehead, nodded. "Ambassador Okafor came to your summit to ask for a seat at your table. He believed that the galaxy operated on shared principles. He believed that if he explained who we were honestly, openly, you would see us as people worth knowing." Herrera paused. The elderly man with the sling placed his hand on the table, palm down, and Herrera put his own hand over it. A small gesture. The camera caught it. "David was a good man. He taught my son mathematics when we didn't have enough teachers. He helped carry irrigation pipe in the northern fields. He ate dinner at my table. He was our neighbor." His voice did not break. It thickened. "You killed our neighbor. On a stage, in front of 1,000 witnesses. And then you told the galaxy he died of atmospheric pressure." Silence in the recording. Silence in the summit chamber. "We are not soldiers. We are farmers and engineers and teachers and medical staff. We came to Rethani 4 because there was work to do and we wanted to do it. We did not come here to fight anyone. We did not come here to threaten anyone. We came here to grow grain and build schools and raise our children." He leaned forward. "But understand this. The fleet in our sky did not come because our government sent it. The fleet came because 11,000 people sent an SOS to Earth, and every human being who could reach a ship launched within minutes. Not hours, minutes. Cargo pilots, miners, fishing boat captains who'd retrofitted their trawlers with whatever they could bolt on. They came because we called and because that's what humans do." Herrera sat back. "You wanted to know what kind of species we are. Now you know. We are the kind that comes when you call. Every single one of us. And the people who killed David Okafor are going to have to decide what that means, because we already know." The recording ended. The chamber was silent for a long time. Acheson retrieved the projector. "I have nothing to add," he said, and walked back to his seat. "I need to stop describing events and describe myself. Not because my internal state matters more than what happened. It does not. 11,000 people were detained. A man was murdered. A fleet of 3,000 ships materialized from what we had assessed as a civilization barely capable of defending a single system. These are the facts that matter. But you are listening to this story through me, and if you do not understand what was happening inside me, you will not understand why I did what I did next, or more precisely why I failed to do what I should have done next for a very long time. I was not in crisis. That is the truth, and it is the worst thing about me. I watched the Herrera recording with the same analytical detachment I had applied to every piece of intelligence in my career. I noted the emotional content. I assessed its likely impact on the undecided delegations. I calculated which Conquered members would shift their positions in response to the footage and which would hold firm. I produced a briefing for Ren, a briefing I delivered that evening in his private study, with the same professional composure I had delivered every briefing for 9 years. The briefing recommended a diplomatic counter-narrative. I recommended that the Ascendancy characterize the human fleet mobilization as evidence of concealed military capability, proof that the humans had been dishonest about their technological level and therefore could not be trusted. I recommended that Ren frame the Rethani 4 occupation as a defensive necessity, retroactively justified by the scale of the human response. I recommended that the Ascendancy petition the Concord for emergency containment protocols, citing the humans as a Category 3 destabilizing force. Ren read my briefing. He approved it. We spent the next 2 days executing this strategy, and for those 2 days, it worked. The Mekran delegation, which had been wavering, returned to the Ascendancy's position. The Davari, always cautious, adopted a neutral stance that functionally favored the status quo. The Bravari, commercially pragmatic above all, signaled that they would support whichever outcome promised the most stability. For 48 hours, I was good at my job. And during those 48 hours, while I managed narratives and calculated voting blocks and drafted position papers, the human fleet at Rethani 4 was doing something I did not bother to monitor because it fell outside my area of responsibility. They were building. I obtained the full operational record later, through channels I will not describe. At the time, I was aware only of the summary reports that filtered through the Concord's observation network, and I dismissed them as logistical noise. The human cargo transports, the hundreds of weaponless vessels that had arrived first, were not carrying troops. They were carrying infrastructure, prefabricated housing modules, water purification systems, agricultural equipment, medical supplies, communications relays, power generators, educational materials, construction vehicles. In the 72 hours following the fleet's arrival, while the galaxy debated the political implications and the Ascendancy scrambled to control the narrative, the humans disembarked 12,000 additional colonists and built a second settlement on Rethani 4. Not a military outpost, not a forward operating base, a town. They laid foundations, they ran water lines, they planted crops using Herrera's alkaline grain adaptation, which they had brought seed stock for, which meant the seed stock had been loaded onto transports before the SOS was sent, which meant I did not finish that thought at the time. I finish it now. The seed stock was already aboard the transports because the transports had been preparing to resupply the colony anyway. The colony was not a strategic asset. It was not a beachhead or a territorial claim or a forward intelligence platform. It was a place where humans lived, and other humans had been planning to bring them better seeds. The fleet launched within minutes of the SOS not because a military command structure activated a contingency plan. The fleet launched because the ships were already there. Cargo ships, supply runners, mining platforms, personal vessels, and the people crewing them heard 11,000 voices say help and did the only thing they knew how to do. They came. Some of them came in ships that could not survive the return trip. The fleet manifest, which I obtained years later, included a converted atmospheric shuttle from a moon called Europa that had a rated range of 400,000 kilometers and had crossed 9 light-years on a jury-rigged drive that its pilot, a 17-year-old apprentice mechanic, had built from a tutorial and parts salvaged from a decommissioned relay satellite. The shuttle arrived at Rethani 4 with 6 minutes of fuel remaining, a non-functional life support recycler, and 1,400 kilograms of medical supplies that the pilot had loaded instead of food for himself. His name was Daniel Okonkwo. He was Okafor's nephew. He had not been told his uncle was dead. He came because the SOS said colony in danger, and he had a shuttle and medical supplies and a direction to point it. By the 5th day, the strategic landscape had shifted beneath us so completely that the ground Ren had built his position on no longer existed. The Ascendancy's narrative that the humans were a concealed military threat could not survive contact with the observation data. The Concord's neutral satellites showed in real time humans building schools and planting grain. They showed human engineers repairing the colony's water treatment facility, which the Ascendancy's occupation force had damaged during seizure operations. They showed human medics, military medics, attached to the warships treating Valkyrie soldiers who had been injured in a structural collapse at the colony's docking facility. Our soldiers, treated by their medics, without hesitation, without condition, without being asked. I saw the footage. A human combat medic, the insignia on his shoulder marking him as attached to a vessel called the Resolute, kneeling beside a Valkyrie corporal with a compound fracture of his lower foreleg. The medic had clearly never treated a Valkyrie patient before. His hands moved with the careful uncertainty of someone working from a reference manual, rather than experience. But he worked for 40 minutes, stabilizing the fracture, administering pain relief from a kit that had been hastily modified with Valkyrie-compatible dosage charts, and talking to the corporal the entire time in broken, terrible Valkyrie that the corporal later described as the worst accent I've ever heard and the kindest voice. The corporal's name was Davin Sol. He sent a message to his family that night. The message was intercepted by Ascendancy intelligence and flagged as a security concern. It read, "The humans fixed my leg. One of them gave me his ration bar. It tasted like dirt and sugar. I think we made a mistake." That message was one of 412 similar messages sent by Ascendancy personnel on Rithani 4 in the first 5 days. All were flagged, all were suppressed. I know this because I was copied on the suppression order. I filed it without comment. On the 6th day, Ren received a communication from the Sovereign Council that I was not privy to. He emerged from his private suite with a face I had never seen him wear. Not defeated, not afraid, resolved. The face of a man who has exhausted every alternative and arrived at the option he had been holding in reserve. "Torath," he said, "prepare a formal statement for the Concord Assembly. The Ascendancy is withdrawing its forces from the Rithani corridor." I stared at him. "Consul? The Council has determined that the operational costs of maintaining the corridor exceed the strategic value. The human colony will be recognized as a legitimate settlement under Concord provisional statutes. This is a significant reversal. It is a tactical adjustment." His voice was flat. "The humans have made the corridor ungovernable. Their fleet is too large to dislodge without committing the Home Defense Force, and committing the Home Defense Force would leave the core systems exposed. The mathematics are clear." "And Ambassador Okafor?" Ren looked at me. "What about him?" "Will the statement address—" "The statement will address the territorial resolution, nothing else. Consul, the humans' transmission specifically demanded the return of—" "The ambassador's remains were cremated per standard biohazard protocols on the night of the incident. There is nothing to return." The room was quiet. I heard myself say, "His personal effects." "What?" "His personal effects. The pin, the Nigerian flag, his tablet, his glasses. The evidence bag is in my office, filed under miscellaneous personal items, non-strategic." Ren studied me. "Why are you telling me this?" I did not know. I did not know why the pin mattered. I did not know why, of all the things I had failed to feel in the previous 6 days, the memory of placing a small metal flag in a plastic bag had chosen this moment to sit on my chest, like a stone. "It should be returned to his family," I said. "Torath. His son's name is Amika. He is 14 years old. He wants to study marine biology." Ren's expression did not change. "File the statement," he said, and left the room. I prepared the statement. I filed it with the Concord Secretariat. I attended the assembly session where Ren delivered it. 18 minutes of careful, face-saving language that characterized the withdrawal as a normalization of frontier governance and made no mention of David Okafor, the occupation, or the execution. The assembly accepted the statement. The Sorvani delegates' gill flaps were tight. The Bravari ambassador was already calculating trade routes to the newly recognized human colony. The Mekran delegation nodded in unison, satisfied that the disruption was contained. The machine of galactic politics processed the murder of an ambassador and the occupation of a civilian colony and produced a revised territorial designation and an updated trade schedule. I sat in the third tier and felt nothing. Not outrage, not shame. Nothing. The professional numbness that had carried me through 40 years of service was doing what it had always done, converting moral information into procedural tasks. Filing, processing, moving on. The session ended. Delegates dispersed. I returned to my office and sat behind my desk and looked at the evidence bag containing David Okafor's personal effects. The pin was small, bronze-colored, green and white stripes. I held the bag up to the light and turned it. Then I opened my terminal and drafted a personal communication, not through Ascendancy channels, not through Concord diplomatic circuits, but through the station's civilian network, which I knew the humans were monitoring because they were monitoring everything. The message was 3 lines. To the family of Ambassador David Okafor, his personal effects are in my custody. I would like to return them. My name is Torath Ven. I was in the room. I sent it. I did not sleep. The response came 9 hours later. Not from Earth, not from the fleet. From the Orinoco, still docked at Oralis, still under nominal quarantine, still apparently crewed by humans who had chosen to remain on a station controlled by the government that had murdered their ambassador. The message was not addressed to me. It was addressed to my nephew. Korath Ven received on his personal device a file transfer containing a single audio recording. He brought it to me because the recording was in Valkyrie, and the voice was mine. It was the motion I had read aloud in the reception hall, the emergency resolution. My voice, calm and professional, reading the words that had designated the human colony as an illegal incursion. Every syllable, every pause. The recording had been made from a device I could not identify, positioned close enough to capture my breathing between sentences. Attached to the recording was a text note. We know who read the order. We know you did not write it. We know you signed the incident report. We know the pin is in your desk. Emika would like it back. The question is whether you're the man who delivers it or the man who filed it. You don't get to be both anymore. I read the message 4 times. Then I did something I had not done in my professional career. I walked to Ren's quarters without an appointment at 2 a.m. station time, and I said, I need the ambassador's remains. Ren, half-dressed, his composure fractured by interrupted sleep, stared at me. The remains were cremated. Were they? A long silence. Torath, you are overstepping. Were they cremated, Consul? Or were they sent to the Ascendancy's Medical Research Division for study? Because the human's biology is of strategic interest, and the biohazard cremation protocol is the standard cover for redirecting organic material to the Weapons Directorate, and I have filed that particular cover 17 times in my career for 17 other species, and I am asking you directly whether David Okafor's body is in a research facility on Valkar Prime. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard. Ren sat down on the edge of his bed. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen before. Not anger, not betrayal, exhaustion. The exhaustion of a man who has been carrying a structure on his back for so long that he has forgotten the structure is not the sky. Yes, he said. I left his quarters. I returned to my office. I sat at my desk and looked at the pin. And then, because I am not a hero, because my conversion was not a dramatic moment but an administrative one, because the thing that broke me was not the fleet or the speech or the footage of medics treating soldiers, but a 14-year-old boy's name attached to a small metal flag, I began to compile a file. Every document I had accessed in 40 years of service, every suppression order I had filed, every biohazard cremation cover I had processed, every convenient death I had cataloged as natural causes, every territorial stabilization I had helped execute. Not just the humans, the Mekran, the others, 17 species. The file took me 4 hours to compile. It was 11 terabytes of coincidence that I have never been able to regard as accidental, though I know it was. I transmitted it on the same civilian channel. I addressed it to no one. Everyone received it. I will not describe the political aftermath in detail, because it has been documented extensively by historians with more objectivity than I possess. The broad facts are a matter of public record. The file I transmitted, which the media eventually called the Ven Archive, contained evidence of systematic Valkyrie interference in the internal affairs, territorial sovereignty, and biological autonomy of 17 species over a period of 3 centuries. Assassinations disguised as medical events, territorial occupations framed as stabilizations, biological material harvested from deceased diplomats under cremation protocols, intelligence operations conducted under diplomatic cover at every Concord summit for the past 90 years. The Concord's response was slow, institutional, procedural. It took 11 months for the formal investigation to conclude. It took another 6 months for sanctions to be imposed. It took 2 years for the Valkyrie Ascendancy's permanent seat on the Concord Security Council to be suspended. None of that is what matters. What matters is what happened on Rathani 4 while the galaxy processed the information. The human fleet remained in the corridor. It did not leave. It did not threaten. It stayed, and while it stayed, the humans did what humans do. They built. Within 6 months, the colony had grown from 11,000 to 40,000. The second settlement became a third, then a fourth. Herrera's alkaline grain adaptation was refined and shared, not sold, shared with the Tisari League, whose frontier colonies had been struggling with similar soil chemistry for decades. Human engineers collaborated with Sorvani environmental scientists to develop a water reclamation system that the Sorvani ambassador later described as embarrassingly superior to anything we've built in 400 years. The warships remained in orbit. Their crews rotated home on regular schedules, replaced by fresh personnel who brought their own modifications, their own improvised systems, their own bolted-on solutions to problems that hadn't existed when they launched. The fleet grew uglier and more capable with each rotation. It became a living thing, a reef of metal and purpose that accreted rather than aged. And the people on Rethani 4 named their first new school after David Okafor. They planted a garden outside it. Tomas Herrera grew the first flowers the planet had ever seen in the alkaline soil. A strain of marigold, modified to tolerate the mineral content, that bloomed in a deep orange that Herrera said reminded him of the sunset in a place called Oaxaca. I was not present for any of this. I was on Valkar Prime under house arrest, awaiting trial for treason. The trial lasted 4 months. The prosecution's case was straightforward. I had transmitted classified material to foreign governments, compromising the Ascendancy's intelligence operations and diplomatic position. The charges carried a sentence of life imprisonment in a high-security facility on a moon I will not name, because the name itself is classified, which tells you something about what happens there. My defense was simpler. Everything in the file was true. The tribunal found me guilty. The sentence was handed down on a morning that I remember for its ordinariness, the light through the chamber windows, the sound of atmospheric traffic outside, the weight of the formal judgment seal as the presiding magistrate pressed it into the document. I was transferred to a holding facility to await transport. The transport never came. On the morning I was scheduled to be moved, a communication arrived at the holding facility from a source the facility's commander could not identify and could not block. It was a single line of text. Torath Ven is expected at the Okafor School, Rethani 4. Transport has been arranged. The facility commander, a career military officer named Sevroth Cole, who had served 30 years without encountering a situation his manual did not cover, read the message, looked at me through the barrier field of my cell and said, "Diplomat, what is this?" "I believe," I said, "that I am being collected." "By whom?" "By the people whose ambassador I helped murder." Sevroth Cole considered this for a long time. Then he said, "And they want you alive?" "Apparently." "Why?" I did not have an answer. I still don't, fully. But I had a guess, and the guess was rooted in something David Okafor had said in the reception hall in the 2 seconds before the guards seized him. Not the words, the expression, the way he had looked at me, not with accusation, not with plea, but with recognition. He had seen me, not the diplomat, not the operative, the man who would eventually hold a pin up to the light and feel something he could not file. "I think," I said to Sevroth Cole, "they are better at seeing people than we are." Cole opened the cell. I do not know to this day whether he was ordered to, or whether the facility's security systems were compromised, or whether Sevroth Cole simply looked at the situation a convicted traitor, a message from a species that had just reorganized the galaxy's power structure and a transport window, and made a decision. I did not ask. Some questions are better left as gifts. The transport that collected me from Valkar Prime was a human cargo shuttle compact, scarred, functional. The pilot was a young man named Dio, who spoke fluent Valkari with an accent that suggested he had learned it from recordings rather than conversation. He offered me water and a nutrient bar that tasted like compressed grain and something vaguely sweet. He did not ask why I was being transported. He did not appear to care. "You're the one who sent the file," he said, halfway through the transit. "Yes." "My dad says you're either the bravest man in the galaxy or the dumbest. Your father may be right on both counts." Dio laughed. It was an easy sound, unburdened, unperformative, the laugh of a young man who found something genuinely funny and expressed it without calculation. I had not heard a laugh like that in a very long time. Rethani 4 from orbit looked different than the intelligence images I had studied. The images showed a frontier colony, sparse, utilitarian, fragile. What I saw from the shuttle's viewport was a world that had been touched, not transformed, touched. Green patches in the gray-brown alkaline plains, clusters of structures connected by roads that followed the terrain rather than imposing on it. Atmospheric moisture patterns that suggested active water cycling from the reclamation systems. We descended to the primary settlement's landing zone. The air outside was cold and mineral-sharp, breathable for Valkyrie, but with a chemical edge that caught in the sinuses. The sky was a pale lavender, almost white at the horizon. I stepped off the shuttle and stood on the soil of a world my government had tried to steal from people who had done nothing but grow food and teach children. A man was waiting on the landing pad, tall, dark-skinned, gray-haired. He wore work clothes, boots, heavy trousers, a jacket with soil on the sleeves. His hands were the hands of a person who used them to move physical objects every day. "Torath Ven," he said. "Yes. Thomas Herrera." We looked at each other. There was no hostility in his face, no warmth either. Something more precise than either, an evaluative attention. The way a farmer looks at soil. "I want to show you something," he said. He walked. I followed. We crossed the settlement on foot, 15 minutes through streets that were not streets, but packed paths between structures, past gardens and workshops, and a communal kitchen from which the smell of cooking grain drifted, past a group of children playing a game that involved throwing a ball at a wall and catching it on the rebound. One of the children was Valkyrie. I stopped. Herrera noticed and waited. "That child," I said. "Davin Sol's son." Corporal Sol requested permission to relocate his family after the withdrawal. We said yes. A Valkyrie child on a human colony. A child on a colony. Herrera's tone was not corrective, simply precise. We continued. The school was at the settlement's eastern edge, built from local stone and prefabricated panels, single story with large windows that let in the pale light. The sign above the entrance read, Okafor School in human script, and beneath it, in Valkyrie, place of learning. Herrera led me inside. The corridors were narrow, the walls lined with drawings and writing samples and star charts hand-drawn with colored markers. The floors were clean. The air smelled like chalk and children, a universal scent I learned that day, that transcends biology. He stopped at a classroom door. Inside, a man sat at a low table with 12 children, 9 human, 2 tesserae, 1 Valkyrie assembled in a loose semicircle. The man was reading to them from a book, holding it up so the children could see the illustrations. His voice was calm and measured, pitched to carry without raising, the voice of someone who had been talking to children long enough to know the exact frequency that holds attention. "That is James Achebe," Herrera said. "David's friend. He came with the original colony. He stayed through the occupation. He taught classes in the detention center because the children were scared, and he decided they should learn something while they waited." I watched through the window. Achebe turned a page. The Valkyrie child raised a hand and asked a question I could not hear through the glass. Achebe listened, nodded, and responded. The child's posture relaxed. "Why am I here?" I asked. Herrera did not answer immediately. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small object, bronze-colored, green and white stripes, the pin. "The Orinoco crew recovered it from your office after you were arrested," he said. "We were going to give it to Emeka directly, but he asked us to wait." "Wait for what?" "For you to bring it." I looked at the pin in Herrera's hand. "Emeka asked for me?" "He said the man who held his father's flag should be the one to hand it back. He said it was important that you do it yourself." "Why?" Herrera's expression shifted, not softened, specified. A look directed at me and meant only for me. "Because David talked about you, in the letters he sent home. He mentioned a Valkyrie diplomat who laughed when someone called him a schoolteacher. David said the laugh would bother you eventually, that it would take time, but it would get there." I stood in the hallway of a school named after a man I had helped kill, holding a wall for balance, and felt the laugh arrive, not as memory, as weight. The full, specific, physical weight of my own voice in a corridor on Oralis, laughing at a schoolteacher who had crossed the galaxy to shake hands with people who were planning to murder him, and who knew it, and who came anyway, because the 41 children in this building and the grain in those fields and the future those things pointed toward were worth more than his own life. He had known. About Ren. About the plan. About me. He had known, and he had come, and he had stood at the dais and talked about schools, and he had done it not because he was naive, but because he believed with the particular ferocity of a man who had spent his life in classrooms that if you say the true thing clearly enough, it plants a seed, even in alkaline soil, even if you are not alive to see it grow. Herrera waited. He did not speak. He did not comfort me. He let me stand in the hallway with the weight and did not pretend it was anything other than what it was. When I was ready, he handed me the pin. "Emeka is in the library," he said. "Third door on the left." I walked to the third door. I opened it. A boy sat at a table near the window reading. 14 years old, tall for his age. He had his father's hands long-fingered, expressive even at rest. When he looked up, he had his father's eyes. "You're Toreth Ven," he said. "Yes." "You were in the room when my father died." "Yes." "Did he say anything?" I remembered. The last thing Okafor had said to Ren in the reception hall as the guards approached. The last words I had heard from him before the maintenance corridor, and the neural restraint and the cover story and the pin in the bag, and the 40 years of my career distilled to a single plastic evidence bag marked non-strategic. He said, "You're going to regret this," I told the boy. He was looking at the High Consul, but I think he meant it for the room. Emeka considered this. That sounds like him. He always said the thing that was true, even if nobody was ready to hear it. I held out the pin. Emeka looked at it. He did not take it immediately. He looked at my hand at the fingers that had filed the evidence bag, that had signed the incident report, that had typed the briefing recommending a counter-narrative, and I understood that he was seeing all of it, not forgiving it, seeing it. He took the pin. "Thank you for bringing it back," he said. "I should have brought it sooner." "Yeah," he said, "you should have." He was not cruel about it. He was precise. The precision of a boy who had lost his father and had decided that the facts of the loss would be honored exactly, without softening, without performance. "My dad said the Valkyrie were good at building systems," Emeka said. He said the problem was they forgot what the systems were for. He turned the pin over in his fingers. "You want to know why I asked you to come?" "Yes." "Because my dad also said that people can remember. He said it usually takes something breaking, something you built yourself. He said when the thing you built breaks the right way, you can see what it was supposed to be." Emeka put the pin in his pocket. He looked out the window at the lavender sky, the alkaline plains, the green patches where grain was growing in soil that had once said no. "You sent that file. You broke the thing you built. I think my dad would have said that counts." "Counts as what?" "As remembering." He turned back to his book. I stood in the library of the Okafor School on Rethani 4, and I understood not as abstraction, not as diplomatic analysis, but as bodily, gravitational certainty what the humans had been building in the corridor while the galaxy processed my file. Not a colony, not a strategic position, not a statement, a future, built from grain and schools and children who asked questions and adults who answered them, built from cargo ships that launched within minutes, and medics who treated the enemy's wounded, and a pilot who crossed 9 light years in a shuttle that should not have survived the trip because someone needed medical supplies and he had medical supplies and a direction. A future built the way humans build everything: ugly, layered, scarred, repaired, modified, improvised, bolted together from whatever was available, and so dense with purpose that it could not be damaged faster than it could be rebuilt. I walked out of the school into the thin mineral air of Rethani 4. Herrera was waiting outside, leaning against the wall, his hands in his pockets. "What now?" I asked. "Now?" He looked at me. "Now you work. There's alkaline soil in the eastern flats that we haven't figured out yet. Different mineral composition from the northern fields. My team could use someone with experience processing complex systems." "I am a diplomat. I know nothing about soil." David was a school teacher. He knew nothing about diplomacy. Herrera pushed off the wall and started walking. "You learn." "It has been 11 years. I work in the eastern agricultural zone of Rethani 4, managing soil analysis protocols for a team of 14 humans, 3 Tasari and 2 Valkyrie, one of whom is Davin Sol, the corporal whose broken leg was set by a human medic on the floor of a docking facility while the galaxy watched. I am not redeemed. I want to be clear about that. Redemption is a concept I have studied in human cultural texts, and I understand its appeal, but it does not apply to me. I read the order, I signed the report, I filed the PIN, I laughed. These are permanent facts, and no amount of soil analysis changes their chemical composition. What has changed is what I do with the hours. I wake up, I eat, I walk to the Eastern Flats, I test mineral content in soil samples, I file reports, accurate reports, written in a tense that describes what is, not what is convenient. I eat dinner with colleagues who know what I did and work beside me anyway, not because they have forgiven me, but because the soil does not care who tests it, and the grain does not ask who planted it, and the work is more important than the worker. On the anniversary of David Okafor's death, the colony holds a quiet gathering at the school. No speeches, no ceremony. People stand in the garden Herrera planted and look at the marigolds and say the name and go back to what they were doing. Emeka Okafor is 25 now. He did not study marine biology, he studied xenodiplomacy. He is, as of last year, the youngest human to sit on the Concord's interspecies mediation panel. He carries his father's pin on his lapel. When he speaks at the podium, he has the same warmth, not naivety, not performance, but the directional warmth of a man who finds the beings in front of him genuinely interesting and is speaking to them individually. He looks like his father. I have never told him that. I am not the right person to say it. But I watch from the observation feeds when his sessions are broadcast, and I see David Okafor standing at the dais on Oralis, talking about schools and grain and 41 children, and I hear my own laugh, that specific, precise, damning sound, and I let it sit on my chest for as long as it needs to, and then I go back to the Eastern Flats and I test the soil. The soil on Rathani 4 is alkaline. It resists cultivation. It breaks equipment. It requires constant adaptation, constant attention, constant willingness to try something new when the last approach failed. The humans chose this world on purpose, not despite the difficulty, because of it. Because they are the species that looks at soil that says no and hears a not yet. Because they are the species that sends a school teacher to a summit full of killers and believes with the irrational, structural, load-bearing conviction that holds up everything they build, that if you say the true thing in the right room, someone will eventually hear it. David Okafor was right. The laugh did bother me eventually. It took time. But it got there. And the seed he planted in alkaline soil in a room full of people who were planning to kill him. In a silence no one else was willing to break. In a voice calibrated not for diplomats but for students, that seed is a school now. A school and a garden and a boy who became a man who stands at podiums and speaks the true thing, carrying a bronze pin on his lapel like a compass that points not north but forward. That is what the humans built in the corridor while the galaxy decided what to do. That is what the Deathworlders' Armada was carrying, underneath the armor and the ugly welded hulls and the weapons that were never fired. Seeds, and the irrational conviction that the soil would eventually say yes. I test the soil every morning. It is still alkaline. It is still difficult. The readings have not changed in 11 years. But the grain grows. Archival note. The preceding account was submitted by Torath Ven to the Concord Historical Commission 11 years after the Oralis incident. It was entered into the record without redaction. The Commission's archivist noted that the document was received alongside a small, sealed container holding a soil sample from the Eastern Flats of Rathani 4, labeled in Ven's handwriting, alkaline, productive, ongoing.